Hello everybody, this is Dr. Aparna. Today we are going to read a comic one-act play called The Boy Comes Home. Now, what do you mean by a comedy? What do you mean by a tragedy? I'm sure you all see a lot of movies, right? Now, a comedy is something that makes you laugh, that brings a smile to your face, whereas a tragedy has a very tragic ending where you start crying and you don't like the main protagonist undergoing a lot of problems. This play is actually a comic play written by a man called A. Milne. We learn more about its author, but now first let us understand what this play is all about. It is about a young man of around 21-22 years who comes back home after being in the army for about 4 years, and how he matures in the 4 years that he has been in the army, and how he expects his uncle to treat him when he comes back home. So this is basically a play which deals with the subject of generation gap, wherein the older generation always thinks that the younger generation does not know anything, and therefore it needs to constantly guide the younger generation. I'm sure you all have this problem in your houses also, wherein your parents always think that you are very young, you don't know anything, and therefore they think it is their duty and their responsibility to guide you. But then somewhere down the line, one must also realize that you people are growing up. You have a mind of your own and you are capable of taking your own decisions. This is exactly what the play tries to bring out. It's about this young boy who has really got so much of experience in life in the army that he is capable of making his own decisions. He is capable of deciding for himself. He knows what he wants. But his uncle still thinks that he is a young boy who needs to be guided, who needs to be protected, who needs to be told what is good and what is bad, what is right and what is wrong. So the play deals with this kind of generation gap. Now, comedy as an art form evolved in the 5th century BC with Aristophanes, wherein he wrote comic plays which were basically social satires, and they were based on politicians and social norms and various other elements. By the turn of the century, the scenario changed a little more. It was called as a new comedy which evolved, wherein young lovers underwent a lot of misadventures. As the years went by and as there was a lot of change, the tradition was later developed in the Roman comedy. From there it moved on to the Shakespearean and Jonson comedy, and Shakespeare was very famous for his comedies like the Comedy of Errors or As You Like It and so on and so forth. After the 17th century, this moved ahead, and it was later on during the Restoration period, comedy became famous under the writers like Congreve and Wycherley. So today's comedy is a totally different genre. Comedy is something that tickles us. It makes us laugh. It makes us feel happy. We come out after seeing a comic play or a comedy movie, we feel very happy. So a comedy tries to bring out a sense of happiness in us. It makes us feel joyous. It makes us feel light-hearted. And that is the aim of a comedy. Of course, this play too has got its own comic elements. Let us now understand more about its author. Let us now understand more about its playwright, A. Milne. As the creator of Winnie the Pooh, the story of a bear, A. Milne gained a lot of repute. He became very famous. Milne also wrote a number of books, humorous verses and light comedies. Milne's most popular works are Winnie the Pooh, which he wrote in the year 1926, and The House at the Pooh Corner, which he wrote in the year 1928. His full name, Alan Alexander Milne, was born in London and had a flair for writing from his early childhood. He also edited the undergraduate magazine called Grantha at Cambridge. After receiving his BA degree in the year 1903, he started his career as a freelance writer. Milne's essays and poems were published in satirical magazine Punch and also in St. James Gazette. In 1906, he joined the staff at Punch and became the magazine's assistant editor. Milne was so creative that he turned some of his sketches into a novel. A few of his works include Lovers in London, collection of his Punch pieces, Mr. Pym Passes Away in 1919, The Dover Road in 1921, The Red House Mystery, to name a few. A few of his light comedies have made great success on stage, especially Mr. Pym Passes By and The Dover Road are the best among his plays and are popular half a century after their production. Of all the works that were published, Winnie the Pooh, stories for children attained huge popularity, featuring various talking animals and animated versions of toys. Let us now move ahead to the next module and see what the play is all about. The Boy Comes Home is a one-act play. The main characters of this play are a young boy around 21-22 years old. His name is Philip, his aunt Emily, his uncle Mr. James, his two maids in Uncle James's house. One is Mrs. Higgins and the other is a parlour maid called Mary. These are the characters in the play. Now, as I said, this is a one-act play. A one-act play is a play that maintains the unity of time, place and action. Unity of time means that this play reflects the action that occurs in 24 hours. Unity of places, it maintains the same place where the play started. The play starts, for instance, if it starts in the drawing room, it ends in the drawing room. It does not move on to other places. Unity of time, place and action, that is, it has only one plot. It does not have subplots that support it. So, a one-act play maintains these three unities. Now, this play is about a young boy called Philip who comes home after 4 years in army. Now, the army changes him a lot as a person. He becomes more matured, he becomes more confident, he is more capable of taking his decisions, he is sure of himself. In other terms, he has transformed from a little boy to a young man, a man who is sure what he wants in life. But 4 years in the army were a tough time for Philip because he had to get up early in the morning at 5 o'clock, go along with his routine and also fight battles where he was definitely successful. After coming back home, he wishes to relax, he wishes to enjoy life, he wishes to get up at leisure, he wishes to do all those things that he yearned to do when he was in the army. So, this story, this play is about this boy's growing up, this boy's coming home. Coming home does not really mean coming home to a house which has 4 walls. Of course, it means the boy comes home, but it also means he comes home to himself. He comes home to the fact that he has matured. this homecoming talks about Philip's maturity also in the other sense. So once he comes home, he is obviously very tired and he sleeps off, and he doesn't get up early in the morning like he used to when he was in the army. He gets up around 10 o'clock and he goes to the parlor and he asks for breakfast. He calls the parlour maid Mary and orders for bread and omelets, and she is quite surprised, and she says that breakfast is served around 8 o'clock and not after that. He gets very irritated at that and he says, well, he doesn't really have to follow any rules in his own house, so he orders her to get a breakfast for him. Then she again protests, saying that the cook of the house, Mrs. Higgins, would never like it because according to his uncle, who is called Mr. James, who is actually a disciplinarian and very punctual, according to his terms, the house runs. Uncle James demands that the breakfast is always served at 8 o'clock, and Mrs. Higgins always serves the breakfast at 8 o'clock. So she is never going to serve the breakfast after that. But nevertheless, Philip orders her to go and get breakfast for him. She goes out, and as she goes out, Aunt Emily enters and she questions him about his stint in the army. She inquires whether he had slept peacefully the previous night. She also asks if he has had his breakfast, to which he says that he had ordered some breakfast. As this conversation goes on, Mrs. Higgins, who is an elderly lady, comes in, and she is not very happy with the situation. She is very angry actually, and she says that breakfast is always served at 8 o'clock and not after that. To which Philip gets very annoyed and he says he demands his breakfast. She gets even more angry and she says, these are the rules of the house. Your Uncle James says that breakfast should be served at 8 and it is served at 8 and not after that. She gets very irritated and she tries to threaten this young man, and he says, if you expect me to serve breakfast at 10 o'clock, I'd give you 1 month notice. So Philip reacts very fast, and he reacts in a way which she doesn't expect. He is very calm and he says, oh, is that so? So if breakfast is not served after 8 o'clock, at around 10 o'clock as I wish, I don't mind taking your notice. In fact, he takes out a checkbook and writes a check and says, I am giving you 1 month advance so you can happily leave your work and just go away. Of course, Mrs. Higgins is taken aback. She doesn't expect this kind of behavior from a young boy like Philip. And the moment he takes out a check and says that you can leave, she gets a shock of her life. She grumbles a bit, she takes back her notice and anyway goes in to prepare breakfast. Aunt Emily is surprised at this turn of events. She sees a young man in front of her who is very confident of himself, who is very sure of himself, and she is quite surprised at the way Philip handles Mrs. Higgins, and she is quite happy knowing that really Philip has really grown up and he really knows what to do and how to get his things done. In the meantime, she tells him that his uncle is waiting for him. Philip goes out to have his breakfast in the next room. Uncle James enters the room and the conversation between Aunt Emily and Uncle James starts. So Aunt Emily tells Uncle James that Philip is having his breakfast, to which Uncle James obviously gets very angry and he doesn't like the fact that Philip is not punctual, he doesn't have his breakfast on time, he doesn't get up on time, and then he tells Aunt James that he will give him a good sermon and he'll sermonize to Philip saying that how life should be lived and how people should lead their lives. Aunt Emily is quite surprised and she tells Uncle James that Philip is not the same boy who left for an army 4 years back, that he has definitely changed over the years and he has become a young man who is very confident of himself. But then Uncle James says that he has a trump card up his sleeve because all of Philip's money is still under the control of Uncle James. Until and unless Philip is 25 years of age, he cannot get his money. And according to Philip's father's will, Uncle James is his guardian and he has to listen to what Uncle James says. So Uncle James is very confident of the fact that Philip will definitely listen to him because he has the control over his money. Then Aunt Emily goes out to call Philip and says, your uncle wishes to see you. But then Philip is very careless and he says, if uncle wishes to see, he should come and see. But nevertheless, he says, okay, fine, he would definitely go and see his uncle. As we get back to the living room, what we see is that Uncle James is rather tired and he starts dozing off. He starts sleeping and slowly he goes into a slumber. There he starts dreaming. What happens in this dream, whether it really was a dream or whether it really happened, is something we won't know till the very end of the story. So as he dozes off, he starts getting into a dream. He starts dreaming and he sees Philip enter the room. And the conversation between uncle and Philip starts. So uncle again reprimands him for getting up so late. He asks him to be more punctual. He asks him to be more on time for his breakfast, and so on and so forth. Philip, in the meantime, takes out a cigarette and starts smoking. Uncle James gets very wild. He gets infuriated. He does not understand how a young man can smoke in front of an elderly person like that. And he says, your aunt does not like it if you keep smoking. So immediately Philip shouts across the room and asks his aunt whether she has any problems if he smoked. And he gets a reply saying that she of course does not have any problem. And the conversation moves. Now Uncle James tells him that he should join the family business. And what is the family business? They make jams. Philip obviously does not want to join the family business. He says he wishes to become an architect. He wants to do something new with his life, and so on and so forth. Uncle James gets very angry and he says that he should realize, that Philip should realize that his money is still with him. He still has control over the boy. Philip gets very wild and he says he wants to move away from this house. He wants to live separately. He wants to just move away and he wants to lead a peaceful life without his uncle around, without being disciplined by his uncle. To which uncle replies that he cannot do that because he still has his money with him and he still has a control over the boy. And he also tells him that Philip is not matured enough, and Philip goes on to prove that maturity lies in the mind. It does not really lie in the age. And he gives him instances in the army where he was able to manage his troops perfectly well without his higher officers. Uncle agrees to all that, stating that yes, he could have done a great job in the army, but then he was not really that grown up to look after his own money, and he forces Philip to join the family business. This kind of tussle goes on and Philip tries to use force on Uncle James. So how does he do that? He takes out his revolver and Uncle James gets really worried when he sees a revolver in Philip's hand. And he says, what is this revolver for? And he says, revolver is obviously meant to kill, and he had killed around 20 Germans in the war. So Uncle James really gets scared that Philip is definitely going to use that revolver on him, and he starts talking to Philip in a different tone. He tries to soften him up, he tries to talk sweetly to him, and so on and so forth. And Philip uses force to control force. That is exactly what Uncle James was doing, was he not? He was trying to use his force on Philip. So Philip now turns the table, he takes out a revolver and he uses the force of the revolver to subdue his uncle. At that point of time, Uncle James wakes up, and that coincides exactly with Philip's entry into the room. So he doesn't really know whether this was a dream sequence or whether it really occurred. And then again the conversation starts, and this time he takes the permission of his uncle, he starts a smoke, and then uncle questions Philip, what is it that he wished to do after coming back home? And Philip says he really did not have an idea of what he wished to do, but then he hoped that his uncle would take him into his jam business. So uncle is pleasantly surprised that Philip is so interested in joining the jam business of the family. And then he is quite happy that Philip is so positive towards him. And he says that he would definitely welcome Philip into the jam business. But then he also tells him that they should go and meet the manager of their business. And this manager's name is Mr. Bamford. Uncle James tells him that Mr. Bamford is rather finicky and he's a little troublesome person, to which Philip very confidently says he knows how to control trouble, he knows how to overcome difficult people. He takes out his revolver and he walks out. Uncle James gives a little nervous laughter, and then he wonders whether what he dreamt was really a dream or did it really happen. So what do we see in the end? We see a different Philip, a Philip who is very confident of himself, a Philip who knows how to handle situations, a Philip who knows how to use force to see that things turn to his benefit, a Philip who has come back home to himself. He has come back home to his maturity. He has come back home to his confidence. So a boy comes home does not really mean coming home to four walls, but coming home to yourself, coming home to your own confidence and your own personality. Philip definitely has changed a lot, and uncle realizes that. And uncle also realizes that not only has Philip grown up, but he has become a more sure and a more matured person who is capable of taking in the responsibilities of the family business. Critically. Now, Philip comes back home after 4 years. He comes to a house that is full of discipline. He comes home to a place which works on clockwork precision. He comes home to a man who behaves like a dictator. He comes home to a place which is equal to an army. A home is not a home for him. What is a home? What do you expect when you think of home? What things come into your mind when you think of home? I am sure when I think of my home, I think of relaxing, sitting in front of the television, drinking a hot cup of coffee, perhaps reading a book or two, and finally going back to sleep. A home should not be a station of an army or a place in the army. You cannot run a home in a clockwork precision. Now, when he comes back to a home like that, he is very disappointed. And in any case, since he has always lived in that home and he knows how his Uncle James was, he doesn't want to come back to the same home, to the same Uncle James who is a strict man. He tries to break down the barriers. He tries to break down all those norms, and he gets up late in the morning, he orders breakfast, and he wants to do whatever he wishes to do. But then, which is obviously not liked by Uncle James. And how does Philip, turn around Uncle James to his point of view? How does he make Uncle James realize that he is a grown man, he is a person who is capable of taking his own responsibilities, whether it is by force or whether it is by cajoling or whether it is trying to explain people. There are different methods of making people to listen to what you have to say. And in this case, Philip uses force because he understands force is the only thing that can be used against force, so that he can make his uncle realize that he has really grown up. Aunt Emily, on the other hand, appears to be a very, very soft character. She is a very loving person who showers her love on Philip, who inquires about his well-being, who inquires whether he had slept well the previous night. She is very kind to him. She knows that he has had a lot of problems in the army, and she wishes that he can be comfortable in the house. Mary, who is a parlour maid, is one character who is there but doesn't have much of a say in this play. She only voices the decorum, the discipline of Uncle James, and she only says what Mrs. Higgins or the Uncle James wants her to speak. Mrs. Higgins turns out to be another Uncle James who is a disciplinarian in her own right. She is a great cook, no doubt, and she runs her kitchen the way a major would possibly command his army or whatever. So there isn't much difference between her and Uncle James, and she is very haughty. She's very confident of the fact that she can never be kicked out. She is very sure that her job is secure. She gets a shock of her life when Philip very calmly takes out a checkbook and writes it out to her, saying that she can obviously anytime leave the job because he will never get threatened by her. So Philip is affecting so many people. He is trying to get a foothold in this house. He is trying to tell everybody that yes, he is here, he has come back home, he is not a young boy, he cannot be treated like a young boy, he is a young man who has seen a lot in life, who has seen the world, who has faced a lot of difficulties while he was in the army. So he knows what life is all about and he knows how to enjoy life. It is not necessary that one has to be totally disciplined, getting up in the morning, doing your exercises and all. You can be disciplined, at the same time you should know how to enjoy life, and that is exactly what his ideas are all about. Aunt Emily is the first one to really understand Phillips. She understands that he has really grown up. She realizes that he has become a big boy, a young man who is very sure of himself. Mrs. Higgins, obviously, who does not know much about him, also gets a shock and realizes that she cannot bully him, she cannot get her way through him. Uncle James, on the other hand, it takes some convincing on Philip's part to make him realize that Philip has really grown up. He is the same dictator, he is the same disciplinarian, he does not like Philip to be lazy, he does not expect Philip to be cool and calm, he expects Philip to be a great boy, he expects him to get up at 5 o'clock, have his breakfast at sharp 8 o'clock, behave like a good person, listen to what he has to say. He expects that he would join the jam business, but then nothing of that really happens. Whatever he dreams Philip should do, Philip doesn't really agree to all that. He uses the same kind of force on Uncle James. He takes out a revolver and threatens him. And Uncle James is really forced to listen to what Philip has to say. So ultimately, what do we realize? That the older generation definitely is right, because they have a lot of wisdom, they have lived a lot of life, they have a lot of experience, and therefore they are a guiding force in youngsters' lives, no doubt. But then youngsters are no less intelligent. They have their own right to speak their mind, they have the right to lead the life they want to lead. So they will definitely listen to the advice of the elders, but then they are capable of taking their own decisions. They know what is right for them and what is wrong for them. That is the case with Philip. Philip definitely knows what is good for him and what is not good for him. He is not against the fact that he never says no to the jam business. He never really says no to his uncle. Eventually he does join the family business. Eventually he does heed to what Uncle James says. But at the same time, he puts his foot down. He tells Uncle James indirectly that he has grown up. He tells him that he is capable of taking his own decisions. I am sure you all face such situations at home, where your father or your mother or your relatives are always sermonizing, are always telling you what to do and what not to do, what is good for you, what is not good for you, how you should behave, how you should get dressed, what kind of hairstyle you should have, what kind of clothes you should wear. You should not wear jazzy clothes, you should not wear jeans, you should be soberly dressed, and so on and so forth. I am sure that must be very irritating. But then the elder generation should also realize that you are growing up and you have a mind of your own, and that they should be treated more like friends than as youngsters who need to be guided. As our children grow up, they become more of our friends, and we should not dictate them. This is perhaps this play is trying to teach us. We should treat everybody with respect. Children no longer are children. Once they grow up, they become adults and have a mind of their own, and that mind should be respected, that should be adhered to, and they should be given importance in the family like anybody else. As your child grows up, you should realize a child is capable of taking his own decisions, and perhaps better decisions than you, because he belongs to a newer generation. Definitely there is always a generation gap, and each generation as it comes forth is more evolved and more intelligent than the previous one. So one must respect that in the youngsters and let them lead their lives. Elders should be mentors, elders should be there to give advices, give suggestions, help them, guide them whenever the youngsters need. But youngsters are capable of taking their own decisions. This is something that elders should definitely learn, and once that is understood, then definitely a lovely bond is created between the elders and the youngsters. The youngsters always look up to the elders for advices, and the elders can in turn also learn a lot from the youngsters. I hope you will relate this to your lives and try to enrich your life after going through this lesson. This lesson has really taught me as well as you a lot of lessons. This is something that we should always keep in mind. Respect your elders, give them the due respect, give them the due credit, listen to what they have to say, learn to agree to what they have to say. Finally, you give in your ideas, put your ideas in front of them in a very good manner so that they listen to you, and then there is a harmony that sets in your life. Thank you so much for listening to this lesson.